My sister mailed me a birthday gift. When my commander saw it, he said calmly, "Step away." I asked why. He just pointed at the shipping label. 30 minutes later, the military police stormed in. The room was cold, sterile, and soundproofed, designed to make a person feel completely and utterly alone. Across the steel table sat my sister, Chloe, a woman who always needed to be the star of the show, now just a tear-streaked mess under the gaze of two silent military police officers. She kept trying to catch my eye, searching for an ally, for the little sister she was used to saving. I offered her nothing but stillness. The door hissed open, and my commander, Colonel Evans, entered. He was a man who valued precision, and saw competence where my own family only saw a hobby. He placed a thin file on the table, the sound echoing in the silence. He didn't even glance at Chloe. His eyes, sharp and analytical, were locked on me. "Specialist Sharma," he began, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "Counterintelligence requires your official assessment. Is this individual a threat, a witting accomplice, or merely a useful idiot?" The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow. I saw the moment the truth finally landed in Chloe's eyes, the horrified realization that I wasn't the one in trouble. I was part of the tribunal. Just 30 minutes earlier, I was actually smiling. The mailroom at a high-security signals intelligence base isn't exactly a place of joy, but the arrival of a birthday package can change that. My friends were laughing with me as the clerk handed over a gaudy, brightly wrapped box that was so Chloe. I reached for it, a rare, uncomplicated warmth spreading through my chest. But then a shadow fell over the package. It was Colonel Evans. His usually relaxed demeanor was gone, replaced by a rigid mask. "Step away, Sharma," he said, his voice a low command that cut through the chatter. I was confused. "Sir?" I asked, my hand frozen in midair. He didn't answer. He just pointed a single, steady finger at the shipping label. My eyes followed his direction and the warmth in my chest turned to ice. There on the from line, scrawled in my sister's bubbly handwriting, was the phrase that would detonate my entire life. It was a stupid, lifelong joke, a constant, condescending jab at my secretive career, but in this world, a world of codes and consequences, it was a confession. It said, "From your favorite little spy." Chloe thought it was hilarious. She'd been calling me her little spy since I enlisted, convinced I was just pushing paper in some forgotten corner of the army. She had no idea she'd just used a known trigger phrase on the watch list of the very agency I worked for. To understand the storm she unleashed, you have to understand the two lives I was forced to live. To them, I was just a ghost at the dinner table, a quiet presence to be tolerated. This was never more clear than at our last family Christmas. The entire evening was, as always, the Chloe show. My sister, Chloe, a high-energy social media manager who mistook attention for affection, was holding court. She had her phone out, swiping through analytics from some viral campaign she'd orchestrated for a soft drink. Her voice was loud, her gestures grand, and the whole family was completely captivated by the story of how she made a hashtag trend for 12 hours. It was her entire world. Likes, shares, and fleeting public approval. My father, Mr. Sharma, a man who measured success by how easily it could be explained at a cocktail party, was beaming. He saw his own ambition reflected in Chloe's easy charisma. I sat there nursing a glass of water, feeling the familiar invisibility cloak settle over me. After Chloe's performance finally wound down, there was a brief lull. I saw an opening, a foolish little flicker of hope that maybe this time would be different. I cleared my throat and mentioned that I'd just received my scores from the Defense Language Aptitude Battery. I told them I'd scored in the top 1%. For a moment, there was silence. I saw my father process the information, his brow furrowed not with pride but with confusion. What was a DeLob? How could he boast about that? It had no sparkle, no glamour. He reached across the table and gave my hand a dismissive pat, the gesture I'd come to dread. "That's nice, honey. All those books finally paying off," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But Chloe, she's out there in the real world, making things happen." Chloe shot me a look from across the table. It wasn't mean, not exactly. It was worse. It was pity. The internal ledger in my mind flipped through another dozen entries. The science fair trophy that was never displayed, the academic scholarships that were met with a shrug, the years of my quiet diligence being treated as a quirky, unmarketable hobby. My real world was a place they couldn't even imagine. It wasn't a loud, festive dining room. It was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, a room so secret it didn't officially exist, bathed in the cold blue glow of monitors displaying waterfalls of encrypted data. There was no laughter here, only the low of servers and the intense, focused silence of people engaged in work that had zero margin for error. This was my office, my chair, my world. I wasn't quiet Anya here. Here, I had a different name. Just weeks before that Christmas dinner, I was on shift. My headphones pressed tight against my ears as I parsed raw signals intelligence from a high-threat region. My eyes scanned the data stream, looking for patterns, for whispers in the static. And then, I saw it. It was tiny, almost imperceptible. A micro-variation in the digital transmission. A jitter, we called it. It was a flaw so subtle it looked like noise, but my training told me it was the fingerprint of a piggyback signal, an unauthorized user on a secure network. It was a full-scale breach, happening in real time, and no one else had caught it. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my report concise and clear. I flagged the intrusion, traced its likely origin point, and recommended immediate countermeasures. I signed the report not with my name, but with my call sign. My commander, Colonel Evans, a career intelligence officer who never wasted a word and saw talent with absolute clarity, was standing behind me less than 5 minutes later. He reviewed my report on his tablet, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at me. A flicker of immense respect in his eyes. "Good catch, Echo 7, he said, his voice low but carrying more weight than all my father's empty praise. "You just prevented a catastrophic breach of the CENTCOM network." He didn't pat my hand. He didn't call me honey. He called me by the name I had earned, and he acknowledged the lives I had just protected. In that silent freezing room, I had never felt more seen. That was my reality. Yet, when I tried to bridge the gap, it was impossible. I remember a phone call with my mother, Mrs. Sharma, a woman whose entire identity was built on maintaining the illusion of a perfect, happy family. I'd tried to explain why I was frustrated after that Christmas dinner, and her response told me everything I needed to know. "Anya, you have to understand," she'd said, her voice full of that placating tone I hated. "Chloe's life is so public. It's all out there. Yours is a government job. It's stable, which is wonderful, but she needs our encouragement more. We can actually see what she does." Her words laid the truth bare. They weren't just ignorant of my life. They were willfully ignorant. My world was too complex, too quiet. It didn't fit into their simple narrative, so they chose not to see it at all. It was easier to celebrate the golden child than to try and understand the one who lived in the shadows. For years, I had accepted the two worlds. In their world, I was Quiet Anya, the government drone. In my world, I was Echo-7, the analyst who safeguarded secrets. After Chloe's package, I realized one world was about to violently collide with the other, and I would no longer be protecting them from the consequences. After the base-wide lockdown was lifted, I found myself in a sterile briefing room with Colonel Evans. The only other thing on the long table was the package, my birthday gift, now sealed inside a clear plastic evidence bag. It looked so small and pathetic. The colonel steepled his fingers, his expression, all business. He explained that the phrase Chloe had written, combined with the package's destination at a known signals intelligence hub, had tripped an automated system. It was called Operation Red Flag. The protocol was absolute. The system didn't have feelings or a sense of humor. It saw a potential threat and mandated a full counterintelligence investigation of the sender. By design, it assumes hostile intent until proven otherwise. I felt a strange calm settle over me as he spoke. This was a world I understood. It was a world of logic, of cause and effect. Chloe had provided the cause. The system was providing the effect. Then Colonel Evans offered me something I never expected, and out. "I can classify this as a non-credible domestic instance, Sharma," he said, his voice quiet. "An overzealous system flag. We can make the report disappear." For a split second, I saw the easy path. I could bury it, go back to the quiet resentment, the dismissive pats on the head, the endless cycle of being invisible. The internal ledger of 1,000 slights told me not to. I looked at the evidence bag, at my sister's careless looping handwriting. This wasn't about revenge. It was about forcing her, for the first time in her life, into a world where actions have unavoidable consequences. "No, sir," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "The protocol was triggered by the data provided. The protocol must be followed to its conclusion. My relationship to the sender is irrelevant." A look of grim understanding passed over the colonel's face. He knew I was making the right choice and the hardest one. My next task was to build the preliminary investigation file on the sender. I sat at a secure terminal, the screen bathing my face in a cold light. I methodically entered the information: Chloe Sharma, her address, her high-profile marketing job. Then I moved to her social media. The very platform she used to project her perfect life became a source of intel. I cataloged every post where she jokingly referred to me as her little spy, every picture she'd tag me in near the base. I wasn't inventing anything. I was simply feeding her own words, her own digital footprint, into a machine that would analyze them without bias or family sentiment. I gave the system the data it required. Every boastful post, Every condescending joke, every picture she'd ever tagged me in became a data point in an official investigation. The military police were dispatched. Chloe was about to find out that in my world, you can't just delete a comment. The military police escorted my sister into interrogation room 3. I watched from the observation room next door, a pane of one-way glass separating my world from the one she was about to enter. The room was a perfect gray box, designed to offer no comfort, no distraction. Chloe entered with the last vestiges of her bravado intact. She was used to rooms shifting to her energy, but this room was a void. It absorbed her indignation and gave nothing back. The 2 MPs left, and the heavy door clicked shut, leaving her utterly alone in the oppressive silence. I could almost hear her thoughts. This was all a big mistake. A misunderstanding. Anya, her silly little sister, must have gotten into some trouble, and they dragged her into it. She started pacing, rehearsing the speech she would give to whatever hapless bureaucrat they sent in. She would threaten lawsuits. She would drop our father's name. She believed she was in control, that the rules of her world, where confidence is currency and the loudest voice wins, still applied. She had no idea that the rules had changed, and that she was now a visitor in a foreign country, and I was the one who wrote the laws. The door opened, and Colonel Evans stepped inside. He didn't sit. He stood with his back straight, holding a tablet like a weapon. He began without preamble, his voice flat and official. "Chloe Sharma," he stated, not asked. "You are the sender of a package that triggered a level 4 security alert at this facility?" Chloe scoffed, the sound shockingly loud in the quiet room. "A security alert? It was a birthday present for my sister. This is insane." The colonel's eyes didn't even flicker. He continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The package contained a known hostile intelligence code word, and was addressed to a secure asset." "Code word? It was a joke," she stammered, her confidence finally cracking. "It's a stupid thing we've said for years. Ask Anya. She'll tell you." Colonel Evans ignored the plea, his voice dropping even lower, becoming sharper. "Our only concern at this stage is to ascertain your motives. We need to know if you were coerced, compromised, or acting with witting intent to make contact with a protected intelligence asset." The clinical, terrifying words hung in the air. Coerced, compromised, witting intent. This was the language of treason, not a family squabble. Chloe's face went pale. The fight was draining out of her, replaced by a creeping dread. She was about to launch into another defensive tirade when the door opened again, and I walked in. I wasn't in cuffs. I wasn't tearful or scared. I was wearing my crisp Army service uniform, my ribbons and insignia perfectly aligned. In my hand, I held a blue file folder with a classified cover sheet. I closed the door behind me and walked to stand beside Colonel Evans, a united front of absolute authority. I didn't look at my sister. I addressed my commander. "Sir," I said, my voice as calm and steady as I had ever heard it. "I've completed the preliminary threat assessment on the individual." I let the word hang in the air. Individual, not Chloe, not my sister. She was speechless, her mouth slightly agape as she looked from me to the colonel and back again. The entire foundation of her world was cracking beneath her feet. Finally, I turned my head and met her gaze. My eyes were as cold as the room. "The joke you wrote," I began, my tone methodical, "is a recognition phrase used by an SVR sleeper cell we have been actively hunting for the last 18 months. It is used to signal a compromised asset." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "Your package being sent to this specific P.O. box, at this specific time, nearly blew the entire operation. It forced us to pull 3 deep cover agents out of the field." Her face crumpled. The last bit of her reality turned to dust. This wasn't a mistake, this was real. But the final blow had yet to fall. Colonel Evans delivered it with surgical precision. "Your sister, Chloe, is not a clerk," he said, his voice cutting through her dawning horror. "She is a specialist in signals intelligence. Her operational call sign is Echo 7. He took a step forward. "She is the lead analyst for the very counterintelligence division that is now investigating you. Your name is on this official report because, as is her duty, she put it there herself." That was it. That was the moment. I saw 20 years of dismissal and condescension evaporate from her face, replaced by pure unadulterated shock. She looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in our lives. She wasn't seeing quiet Anya, the boring little sister with her books. She was seeing Echo-7, a lead analyst, a powerful and unknown entity who held her entire life in the palm of her hand. All the secrets, the late nights, the boring job, it all clicked into place in one horrifying worldview-shattering moment. She had spent a lifetime making me feel small. In the end, it only took 2 words, Echo-7, to show her how big my world really was. 6 hours later, the door to the interrogation room opened, and Chloe emerged. She was a ghost of the woman who had walked in. Her bravado was gone, her face was pale and puffy, and in her hand she clutched copies of the documents she'd been forced to sign, a national security letter and a non-disclosure agreement that legally bound her to silence for the rest of her life. She was no longer just Chloe, the social media manager. She was now a person with a permanent government file, a person who had been officially warned. She saw me down the hall talking with two other analysts and took a hesitant step toward me, her mouth opening to say something. Anything. I didn't give her the chance. I met her desperate gaze for a fraction of a second, gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod of dismissal, and then turned my back on her completely. One of my colleagues was pointing at a diagram on a tablet, asking for my input on a new developing situation, and I gave him my full attention. We walked away, our voices a low murmur of mission parameters and operational security, leaving Chloe utterly alone in the long sterile hallway. In that moment, she was the invisible one, and I finally understood that I had never needed her to see me at all. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in a secure auditorium on base. The rank on my uniform was different now. I was Lieutenant Anya Sharma. Before me sat a class of new intelligence analysts, their faces eager and nervous, reminding me of myself just a few years ago. On the large screen behind me was a slide detailing an anonymized case study. Case File 73, Domestic Origin Anomaly. It detailed how a seemingly innocuous package from a family member, bearing a careless coded phrase, initiated a full-scale security protocol. It was my story, scrubbed of names and polished into a lesson on the importance of vigilance and the unforgiving nature of the systems we uphold. I was no longer the subject of the crisis, I was the one teaching from it. My voice was steady and confident as I walked them through the procedural missteps and the potential compromises, transforming my family's toxic dysfunction into a valuable training asset for the next generation of analysts. The past was no longer a source of pain. It was just data. After the briefing, as the analysts filed out, Colonel Evans approached me. He had a small, rare smile on his face. "That was well done, Lieutenant," he said. The new title from him felt more validating than any praise my family had ever given me. He looked around at the now empty room. "You took a personal crisis and turned it into a professional strength. You demonstrated unimpeachable integrity when it mattered most. That's the mark of a leader." His words were simple, direct, and sincere. They were an acknowledgement of my character, not just my accomplishments. This was my new family, a community built not on dysfunctional obligation and unwritten rules, but on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the quiet acknowledgement of a job well done. It was everything I had ever needed. A few weeks after that, I was in my new office, a bigger space with a window that looked out over the entire facility. The promotion had come with more responsibility, and I was deep into planning a new operation when an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender was Chloe. The subject line was just 2 words, "I'm so sorry." For a moment, I just stared at it. An apology, the thing I once thought would fix everything, the words I had craved for years. I clicked it open with a strange sense of detachment. It was a novel, a long, rambling, pathetic wall of text filled with excuses, self-pity, and pleas for forgiveness. She wrote about how she never knew, how she was just joking, how our parents were devastated. She was sorry for what happened to her, for how her life had been impacted. I read the first few paragraphs and I felt nothing. The old wound was gone. The internal ledger I had kept for so long was closed, paid in full. Her validation was no longer a currency I accepted. Without a second thought, my finger moved to the mouse. I clicked, and the email vanished into the archive folder, unread and unanswered. I turned back to the large holographic map on my main screen, my mind already on the next mission. My peace was finally my own. My sister sent me a gift to remind me who she thought I was. Instead, my commander showed her who I had become. If you've ever had to prove your worth in a world people refuse to understand, share your story below. In this community, your signal is always received loud and clear.